There were no official birth records for the Hollow children, only fragments, scribbled on ledgers, etched into a family Bible, whispered through the cracks of Roane County's history. The air there still hums differently, heavy with iron and old sermons, as if something was buried beneath the mountain that refused to rot. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. They say the first of them appeared after the flood of 1872. Whole sections of Roane County were swallowed by the river that year, taking with it livestock, homes, and an entire schoolhouse. When the waters retreated, the Ormsby family, who lived along the ridge, were the only ones who hadn't evacuated. Their home stood like a black tooth above the drowned valley. In the weeks that followed, people claimed the Ormsby's surviving children had changed, pale, quiet, their eyes too wide for their faces. Some said they'd been under the water too long. By the summer of 1873, Dr. Jeremiah Holt of Knoxville received a letter requesting his study of unusual developmental traits among the mountain children. Holt was a man of the new science, Darwinian, methodical, yet superstitious enough to keep a rosary in his coat pocket. He rode for 3 days into the hills, keeping notes on every hollow-eyed child he met. He described them as sunless, waxen, strangely symmetrical. The Ormsby's youngest girl, Clara, refused to speak at all, only humming the same 3 notes of an old hymn while rocking herself to sleep. No one in town called it a curse, not at first. In the aftermath of the war and the epidemics that came after, deformity and madness were just more signs of the times. But those who had known the ridge before the flood said something had shifted in the soil itself. The spring water tasted metallic. Chickens stopped laying eggs. The dogs refused to go near the Ormsby property after sundown. Holt's first report, dated October 4, 1873, noted that the Ormsby children displayed remarkable anatomical likeness, suggesting direct consanguinity beyond normal generational bounds. He wrote that the eldest boy, Samuel, bore a scar around his neck as if by rope or ligature. Though no injury had ever been reported, when questioned, Mrs. Ormsby claimed it was a birthmark. Holt did not press the matter. Neighbors began keeping lamps lit through the night. They claimed to hear a low droning sound from the ridge, not unlike a swarm of bees, but colder, thinner, threaded through with a kind of human rhythm. The Reverend Alcott from down in the valley led a small prayer gathering at the foot of the hill, urging the family to let the children be examined by holy council. The Ormsbys never came down again. By winter, the ridge was isolated. Dr. Holt wrote that he'd been invited to stay in the house for continued study. He accepted, believing he was documenting an evolutionary oddity, something that might make his name. His last known letter, addressed to the Tennessee Medical Journal, arrived in January 1874. The final line read, "Their eyes adjust perfectly to the dark. They see something I do not." After that, Holt vanished from the record. His name appears only once more in the county's tax ledger, listed as deceased, property unclaimed. The ridge, they say, has never been quiet since. When the thaw came that spring, townsfolk began to notice thin columns of smoke curling up from the ridge again. No one had seen movement on the Ormsby property for months, not since the doctor's mule had been found wandering the creek bed alone. But one evening, under a bruised sky, a trader swore he saw candlelight moving behind the windows, slow, deliberate, as though carried by unseen hands. By then, the Ormsbys had become less a family and more a rumor. Storekeepers in town spoke of them like a cautionary tale, a warning against isolation, pride, and kin, marriage. Yet the women at church whispered something darker, that Mrs. Ormsby's children had not been born at all but made in that house, pieced together by grief and the flood, shaped from whatever the river had left behind. In early May, a surveyor named Caleb Dorr arrived from Knoxville. sent to confirm Holt's death and settle his estate. Dorr kept a small leather journal, later recovered among his effects, now preserved in the Roane County Historical Society. Its first entry reads simply, "The house is silent, but the air trembles." He described entering through the back, where the windows were boarded shut and the curtains smelled of mold. The hearth still held ash, but no food, no clothing, no sign of habitation. On the dining table he found several wax casts of human hands, child-sized, smooth, and perfect. Some were cut open at the palm. Inside each cavity, he said, was a small lump of something dark, fibrous, and animal in nature. Behind the staircase, a door led downward into the cellar. Dorr noted that it seemed recently reinforced with new planks and iron hinges. He pried them open with his boot and descended halfway before the smell forced him back, like river mud and spoiled milk. He wrote, mixed with the sweetness of rot. He saw jars stacked to the beams, filled with a pale brine and indistinct forms, some no larger than a fist, some human in outline. His last coherent entry reads, "They are not preserved. They are gestating." After that, Dorr's handwriting becomes erratic short sentences, half-finished sketches, ink smeared by what looks like sweat or blood. One sketch shows a child's face, but the eyes are left blank. Another shows a hill with something branching underneath it, like veins or roots. Dorr never returned to Knoxville. His horse was found at the edge of town, reins torn, foam dried along its mouth. His journal was discovered weeks later, wrapped in oilcloth beneath the church steps. The sheriff, at the time, a man named Breckenridge, ordered the ridge sealed. The Ormsby property was condemned, and no one was to go near it until the matter could be concluded by the state. But the state never came. No record of official intervention exists. No doctor's report, no deed transfer, no exhumation. It was as if the place had been quietly erased, left to sink back into the hill. By the summer of 1875, new families had moved into the valley. The Ormsby name faded from the church rolls. Yet, on certain nights, when fog clung low and the crickets went silent, locals swore they heard children humming, a single melody repeated over and over, carried on the wind from the ridge. 3 notes, always the same 3 notes. One old woman told her grandson before she died, "Don't look toward the hill when you hear it. They'll think you're one of them." For nearly 5 years, the ridge lay untouched. The forest crept back over the Ormsby property, swallowing the fences, the porch, and the single crooked cross that once marked the family plot. The place became part of local superstition, used to frighten children into obedience and travelers into prayer. But by 1880, curiosity stirred again. That year, the county acquired new leadership. A young clerk named Emmett Vale, ambitious and keen on progress. He'd come from Nashville with a head full of Enlightenment ideas and a pocket watch that never seemed to keep time. When word reached him of the unclaimed Ridge estate, he saw opportunity. Timber, iron, and acreage, all idle, all forgotten. He declared his intent to survey the land and open it for settlement. 3 men accompanied him, Elias Mott, a stonemason, Reverend Alcott's nephew, Thomas, and a freedman named Jonah Wicks, who had worked the mines upriver. Their testimonies, collected years later, paint a portrait of decay, wood blackened to powder, walls warped inward as if the house had been breathing. They said the air inside was damp, still, and oddly warm, though the day outside was cold. A faint humming could be heard beneath the floorboards, steady and low, like the rumble of a distant wheel. In what remained of the dining room, Vale discovered a trunk of Dr. Holt's effect, pages upon pages of notes written in his meticulous, clinical hand. Much of it was unreadable, the ink blurred by moisture, but one passage remained legible. The children are evolving towards silence. They require no nourishment, only darkness and one another. Mott, the stonemason, recalled that Vail laughed when he read it. Evolution towards silence, he said, sounds like the future of Tennessee politics. But that night, when they made camp by the creek, Jonah Wicks woke to find Vail sitting upright, staring into the dark. He whispered that he'd seen a child among the trees, naked, hairless, eyes reflecting the firelight like a cat's. When they searched, there was nothing, only a small depression in the mud, shaped like a hand, but with too many fingers. The next morning, they tried to burn what was left of the Ormsby house. The boards hissed but refused to catch, as though damp from within. When Vail struck his match a second time, the humming began again, faint at first, then stronger, filling the air until the men covered their ears. Mott said it felt like standing inside a bell. Jonah fell to his knees, muttering a prayer. Thomas Alcott fainted outright. Vail alone stood unmoved, his face pale, watching the smoke rise from the blackened chimney. They fled by noon, leaving their tools behind. But 3 days later, when they reached town, Vail was gone. His horse had returned without a rider, saddle empty, reins cut clean. Search parties combed the woods for a week and found nothing. On the 7th night, the wind carried a sound down from the ridge, a thin, uneven whimper, like a child calling for help, repeating the same 3 notes Holt once recorded in his study. Thomas Alcott left Roane County soon after. Mott moved west to Missouri. Jonah Wicks never spoke of it again, but Reverend Alcott, old and dying, told a visitor years later that he dreamt of the ridge, that it was hollow beneath, not with caves but with rooms. Rooms filled with light that never reached the surface. In the years following Emmett Vail's disappearance, Roane County began to unravel. Crops failed without reason. Livestock wandered off in the night and were found later hollowed out, their bodies strangely intact. No blood, no footprints. The older residents whispered that the ridge was breathing again. No one went near it after dusk. By 1883, Reverend Alcott was confined to his bed. His sermons had ceased, but people still came to his house seeking counsel. They said he muttered through the nights, reciting passages that didn't exist in Scripture. His niece, Ruth, claimed he spoke to someone in the walls. When asked, he would only say, "They're not buried, child, they're growing." That same year, a traveling photographer named Horace Bell came through town offering portraits for a dime. He was told to avoid the ridge, yet his curiosity led him there all the same. 3 weeks later, a farmer found Bell's camera in the creek below the Ormsby property. The film plates were warped from water damage, but one image survived, blurry, overexposed. It showed the outline of a figure at the top of the ridge, unmistakably human but distorted, as if its body had folded in on itself. The head was turned backward. By autumn, Roane County's newspapers began printing strange notices. Unidentified infant found near Iron Hollow Road. Local girl claims pale companion in woods. Sheriff Breckenridge, still in office though near blind, sent word to Nashville requesting assistance. No help came. The rail line had been washed out that summer, and the county was nearly inaccessible by wagon. Roane was left to itself, its small, aging population dwindling each year. Then came the letters. In February of 1885, the State Archive received 3 envelopes postmarked from Knoxville, bearing the name Dr. Jeremiah Holt. They were examined by the archivist, who noted the paper was old but recently handled, the ink fresh. The letters contained no address, no greeting, only a scrawl that read, "The experiment succeeded, they remember." Each envelope held a small clipping of human hair, brittle and ash-colored. The archivist burned them and marked the file unsubstantiated. A year later, Ruth Alcott disappeared from her uncle's home. The front door was left open, her shoes by the bedside. The Reverend, too frail to stand, said he heard her laughing all night, the way children laugh when they're lost. He died 3 days later, face turned toward the window, eyes open. By 1890, Roane County existed more in rumor than reality. The last census recorded just 22 households. The ridge was never resettled. Travelers who passed through claimed to see faint light flickering between the trees or shapes moving against the horizon that vanished when approached. One preacher from Virginia, taking shelter in the abandoned church, wrote in his journal, "The ground here is not dead. It trembles like the breath of something sleeping. No one knows who finally burned what remained of the Ormsby house." But in 1891, a fire was seen from the valley, high, orange, unnatural, casting shadows that danced without rhythm. The flames reached so tall they illuminated the sky for miles. When the townsfolk climbed the ridge the next morning, the earth was black and silent. No trace of the house remained, only a wide depression in the soil, round and perfectly smooth, as if the land itself had caved in. The humming stopped after that, for a while. For nearly a decade after the ridge fire, Roane County seemed to rest. The woods grew thick again, swallowing the ashes of the Ormsby property and the hollow it left behind. The few remaining families kept to the valley, farming what land hadn't gone fallow. No one spoke of the ridge anymore, not aloud, but stories, like roots, have a way of pushing through whatever soil tries to smother them. In the spring of 1899, a crew from the Tennessee Geological Survey arrived to map the abandoned mining shafts. Among them was a young assistant named Elias Warren, a university man with a fascination for frontier folklore. He had read about the disappearances, the Vales, the Ormsbys, the strange vanishing of Reverend Alcott's niece, and intended to separate fact from legend. Locals warned him to stay clear of the upper ridge. He smiled politely, wrote their words in his notebook, and ignored them. On May 12th, he and 2 laborers camped near the old burn site. According to Warren's surviving journal, they found something that first night. "The ground here is soft as if freshly dug," he wrote. "When the wind passes, it exhales warmth. A low vibration comes up through the soil. It seems to pulse as though the mountain breathes." The next entries became fragmented, sentences broken, the handwriting shaky, voices under the rock. "They whisper my name. One of the men says he saw children walking between the trees, but the prints, not right, too long, too many joints." The journal ends abruptly on May 14th. When the survey crew failed to return, a search party was organized. They found the camp, but no men, only the remains of their fire and a ring of small depressions surrounding its shallow, hand-sized impressions in perfect circles, pressed deep into the mud, as if dozens of tiny fingers had reached up from below. The official report listed the incident as a geological collapse and closed the file, but the locals knew better. They began calling the ridge the Hollow Ground, a name passed down in whispers through generations who understood that some places should never be disturbed. In 1912, a small schoolhouse was built on the valley floor. During excavation, workers unearthed old stones carved with half-erased symbols, spirals intersecting with cross marks, almost like a compass drawn wrong. The stones were hauled off and buried again behind the school. That winter, 2 children vanished walking home after dusk. Their tracks stopped halfway up the ridge. In the following decades, the county all but disappeared from maps. Its population dwindled until only a handful of surnames remained: Alcott, Goins, Vale, the same families tied to the old stories. They intermarried, and in photographs from the 1930s, the children share a strange resemblance: pale skin, dark eyes that catch too much light, and an expression of listening, as if they still heard something from beneath the ground. One final document appears in the state archives, a letter written in 1949 by a surveyor named Thomas Greer, who had been sent to chart mineral veins along Newman's Ridge. It reads, "There is a sound here that has no source, a hum that comes through the iron and the shale. It's strongest at night. When I put my ear to the earth, I swear I can hear breathing, like something remembering how to wake." After that, there are no more official mentions of Roane County's ridge. The roads that led there have been reclaimed by forest. The valley farms are gone. The maps have changed. But if you hike high enough, some say you can still find a clearing where nothing grows, a circle of black soil that never cools, even in winter. They say if you stand there long enough, you'll feel it, the faint pulse beneath your feet, steady and patient, as if something buried long ago is still waiting to be called by name. By the middle of the 20th century, Roane County had become an erasure, an administrative zone that existed only on paper. Mail for the remaining residents was routed through neighboring Carter County, and state maps marked the ridge as uninhabited woodland. Even the old church records had been boxed and stored in Nashville, their ink fading like the memory of the people who once lived there. But in 1954, a graduate student named Marion Hale reopened the story. She was writing a thesis on isolated mountain communities and the persistence of folk violence. Her supervisor, a folklorist at Vanderbilt, had mentioned the Roane County vanishings as an example of myth overtaking fact. Marion, however, found something more. She began with the 1889 trial of Joseph Goins, the young Melungeon accused of killing Henry Dalton. The court transcripts had been partially destroyed, but she uncovered fragments referencing previous disappearances connected to land disputes. Cross-referencing these with old tax ledgers, she discovered that each missing man had been involved in the forced sale or survey of Melungeon property between 1852 and 1867. Marion's tone in her early letters was confident, even scholarly. But as her work progressed, her correspondence grew uneven, sentences halved, margins filled with frantic sketches. They weren't stories, she wrote. They were instructions, passed down like prayers, to dig in the right place, to listen before striking ground. When she visited the ridge in March of 1955, she brought a tape recorder. The audio survives, degraded by time but still audible. In the first minute, she narrates steadily, her voice thin in the mountain air, standing where the Ormsby homestead burned. Soil still refuses growth after 60 years. Locals say it hums at night, perhaps seismic activity. Then a pause. I hear something, static children, or what sounds like children, not laughter or rhythm, breathing. The recording ends there. Marion Hale was never seen again. Her car was found a mile from the ridge, doors locked, headlights off. Her tape recorder lay on the passenger seat, the reel still turning. The university filed her disappearance as a presumed accident. Her advisor sealed her notes. But the legend spread. Students whispered that if you played the tape alone in the dark, you could hear a second voice under hers, low and patient, whispering in a language no one could identify. By the 1970s, hikers had begun returning to the ridge, drawn by its reputation. Reports accumulated: missing animals, sudden nosebleeds, sensations of vibration beneath the ground. In 1978, a ranger named Harold Pennington reported a persistent thermal anomaly, a circular patch of soil measuring 10 meters across, registering 5 degrees warmer than the surrounding terrain. When he tried to take a sample, his spade struck something hard, hollow, and resonant, like striking an empty drum beneath the surface. Pennington resigned 2 weeks later. His resignation note reads simply, "It isn't soil, it's skin, No official investigation followed. The Department of Conservation closed access to the ridge, citing erosion hazards. In 1982, 50 years after the death of William Shepard, the lawyer who had once defended a Melungeon boy and kept his client's secret, his sealed statement was opened. In it, he described the confession meeting on Newman's Ridge, the 18 murders, the belief that justice had been served in the shadows. But the final paragraph chilled historians most. There were sounds in the earth even then, Shepard wrote. We told ourselves they were echoes, but I have come to think they were answers. The mountain took what we gave it and learned. No one who has read that passage has since returned to Roane County. Still, on satellite maps, a faint indentation can be seen where the ridge once stood, a perfect ring of dark earth in the middle of Tennessee's green expanse. It isn't marked by any road, but some researchers claim that at night the surrounding terrain distorts, as if something beneath is pushing upward, testing the surface. Locals who remain a few elderly families with the old names still lock their doors at dusk. And when asked about the ridge, they'll only shake their heads and say it's still listening. In 1991, the Tennessee Geological Survey commissioned a small team to investigate a series of subsurface tremors recorded beneath the area once known as Roane County. The activity was faint, too shallow to be tectonic, too rhythmic to be coincidence. On the seismograph, the pulses appeared every 40 minutes, as if something alive were breathing deep within the ridge. The team was led by Dr. Leonard Parr, a geophysicist from Knoxville, known for his skepticism of local folklore. He dismissed the stories of disappearances, the hum in the earth, the so-called hollow children as Appalachian mysticism. His objective was purely geological, determine whether the ridge's composition concealed a sinkhole, a mine, or a volcanic vent. Parr's field notes, preserved in the State Archive, began clinically soil density, mineral content, fault line projections, but soon grew fragmented, personal, and strange. Day 2 soil is colder at surface than at 20 ft depth. Inversion effect abnormal. Day 3 found an iron nail embedded in shale layer, impossible depth for human artifact. Day 4, constant static in radio transmission, like faint murmuring. When the team drilled their first borehole, they hit a hollow pocket at 42 feet, perfectly spherical, echoing when tapped. A second borehole yielded the same result, the same geometry. Inside one of the cores, a technician discovered hair pale, fine, and distinctly human sealed within the clay. It should have been impossible. 2 days later, one member of the crew, Stanley Rourke, vanished during night watch. His tent was intact, sleeping bag empty, flashlight still burning. The soil around the campsite appeared disturbed from below, pressed upward, as though something had emerged and then resealed itself. Parr logged it as possible collapse due to ground instability. Though the phrasing sounded desperate, perfunctory, the remaining team broke protocol and began night surveillance, setting up thermal imaging cameras. Footage from the following evening revealed faint humanoid shapes, small, thin figures emerging in short bursts of heat, crawling just beneath the topsoil. They were never fully visible. The ground seemed to pulse around them like flesh. On the final reel, recorded at 3:17 a.m., Parr's voice is audible, shaky, almost whispering. They're moving in patterns, circular, not random, like a dance or a ritual. God help me, they're humming, then static. The rest of the recording is a low vibration that lasts precisely 11 minutes before cutting off. By dawn, the entire ridge had collapsed inward, trees, soil, and equipment swallowed in a single sinkhole nearly 50 meters wide. Rescue crews found no remains. Only Parr's notebook, half burned and soaked, was retrieved from the edge. The last line, written in smeared graphite, read, "We woke it. Or maybe it never slept. After the disaster, the state sealed the area permanently. Official documentation lists it as Geological Failure Site R91A, but locals, the few who still live near the border, call it the Mouth. They claim that on certain nights when the wind is still, you can hear voices rising from the hollow, not screaming, not weeping, but singing in harmony, as if dozens of children are calling someone home. Satellite scans in 2002 showed slight ground movement in the area, a swelling, then contraction, a slow inhalation and exhalation of the ridge itself. Scientists proposed gas pockets or shifting sediment. Yet one frame in the infrared series showed a heat bloom shaped like a human spine, extending the length of the valley. Today, the Roan Ridge region is closed, fenced, and overgrown. No wildlife nests there. The soil resists planting. The air feels wrong, too still, too heavy, as if the earth beneath remembers what it consumed. And still, the hum persists steady, deep, patient, the heartbeat of something waiting beneath Tennessee. In late 2011, a classified memorandum surfaced within the Tennessee Department of Health, dated June 3, 1008, 191, amended copy. The file had no cover sheet, no author attribution, only the embossed seal of the State Medical Board. Inside were hand-typed transcriptions of field reports, assumed to be compiled from Dr. Jeremiah Holt's private journals, the same Holt whose letters to the archives were dismissed as forgery more than a century earlier. The contents redefined everything. It began plainly, specimen viability confirmed, cross-generational resilience exceeds expectation. The Ormsby line carried it true. The it was never defined, but throughout the 42-page document, it appeared interchangeably with words like sequence, seed, and organism. Holt described not contagion but inheritance, an altered strain of human physiology passed through family lines that refused decay. He noted that the flesh renews itself endlessly, and that subject exposure to soil catalyzes regrowth. One paragraph, smeared and nearly unreadable, mentioned an external host network, a phrase later repeated by Dr. Leonard Parr in his 1991 notes. The implication was horrific, that whatever was altered within the Ormsby blood had moved outward, into the land itself. The soil had become the vessel. Holt's final entry read, "I see their faces now. Even beneath the dirt I know them. The children do not die. They remember the hands that built them." If true, it meant that the hollow children weren't the result of divine curse or spontaneous horror, but of experiment human, made, deliberate, and concealed. The families around Roan Ridge, the Vales, the Alcotts, even the Ormsbys, had been the test subjects. The Reverend's sermons, the holy fasting, and cleansing of the bloodlines were all part of Holt's design, his way of masking genetic trial as spiritual purification. An anonymous archivist, identified only by initials L. W. appended a note in the margin of the rediscovered memo, findings suppressed after 1,891 collapse, entire county condemned under geological pretense, records of experiment are sealed under national security clause. He added one final, chilling line, "They built it under the house." When modern investigators cross-referenced the coordinates given in the memo, they discovered that the site of the original Ormsby homestead aligned precisely with the epicenter of Parr's 1991 sinkhole. The pattern of tremors recorded over the decades matched a gestational cycle rising every 33 years, then falling dormant again. The next peak, they calculated, was due in 2024, and then there was the soil. Samples collected secretly by university researchers in 2012 showed abnormal organic composition traces of human DNA intertwined with fungal mycelium. It reacted to heat, producing faint electrical pulses. Under microscopy, the cells slid almost intentionally toward the edges of the slide as if trying to escape. In a leaked recording from that same year, a researcher can be heard whispering, "It's still alive. It's waiting for the next host." The department denied the tape's authenticity. Yet all testing at Roan Ridge ceased abruptly in 2013. Funding withdrawn, access revoked. The official reason, site contamination. Unofficially, several members of the team never returned home. Their last GPS transmission reads simply, "Below." Since then, the ridge has been erased from most maps. Satellite imaging blurs the area, but locals near the old county line still speak of it, how the earth glows faintly in spring, how the air smells of copper and wet stone. And on clear nights, they swear they hear the hum again, deeper now, slower, almost like a voice forming words. By 2024, Roan County was a name spoken only by historians and night radio callers. The land where it once stood, 30 square miles of fenced woodland, was now labeled Federal Ecological Reserve Zone 12A. Entry was punishable by fine and imprisonment. Yet on the night of May 12th, 2 hikers breached the barrier. Only one returned, the survivor, a 26-year-old man named Elias Brandt, was found wandering near the Cumberland River 4 days later. His skin was pale, his eyes unfocused. He spoke softly, repeating one phrase over and over. They wanted to be remembered. Authorities dismissed him as delirious, dehydrated. But when tested at the medical facility in Nashville, something curious emerged. His blood cells divided at an abnormal rate, resistant to necrosis. The attending physician noted faint filament growth along his spine, pale and flexible like roots. The official report was sealed within hours. Elias died that night. His body was taken by federal order before autopsy could begin. Weeks later, the tremors returned. The U.S. Geological Survey described them as microseismic oscillations localized to a non-fault zone. But in pattern, they were identical to Parr's recordings from 1991 and, before that, to Dr. Holt's sequence intervals. The breathing had resumed. Residents of the nearby valley began to report other things: the smell of rain when the skies were clear, the distant sound of children's voices at dusk. One farmer swore he saw movement beneath his cornfield, a rippling beneath the soil that passed like a wave. A drone team sent to survey the ridge lost signal 5 minutes in. The footage retrieved from its onboard camera showed 30 seconds of static, then a single, clear frame before total blackout, a figure standing in the basin. Small, childlike, pale as moonlight, around it dozens more, half-formed, motionless, their bodies fused with the soil. The hum followed, deep, resonant, almost orchestral now, like the earth itself was singing through the throats of the dead. In late June, a memo circulated internally among the Department of Energy, citing bioorganic subterranean growth exceeding initial containment parameters. The memo's closing line was redacted, save for 3 words left visible: human origin confirmed. From that point forward, Roan Ridge was buried beneath a permanent seal, a layer of synthetic stone poured over the basin. Surveillance towers were erected. Unmanned sensors continued to record low-frequency vibrations from beneath. The rhythm has not stopped once in 10 years. An unverified recording from one of those sensors leaked online in 2025. The sound begins as a low rumble, then rises into a pulse. At the 40-second mark, a voice can be faintly heard beneath the static. It's not buried, it's growing. If you visit Tennessee today and drive west past the old river crossings, there's still a patch of land where no birds fly, where your radio will catch a signal that doesn't exist. You'll hear that hum if you listen closely, not in your ears, but in your chest. A low vibration that sinks to your heartbeat, and if you stand there long enough, you might notice the ground shift, just slightly, like the soil drawing breath. Some say it's the hollow children stirring again, their bodies now part of the landscape, patient and listening. Others insist they never left at all. Every 33 years, the Earth remembers its own experiments, and it always calls something back. It's not over, the soil remembers.